Good morning, everyone. I'm Byron Radcliffe. I'm the chairman of board of SID-Washington and vice president for development at the QED Group, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2014 SID Annual Conference. We're very pleased today to see such a large crowd. In fact, we have 900 people registered for today, which is the largest in our history. And one of the reasons I'm sure many of you came this morning was to hear our first speaker, USAID Administrator Shah. Raj will engage in a moderated conversation with Asif Shaikh, and Asif is known to most of us in this development community from his days at IRG, which is now Angelity, and who was honored at our December annual dinner for his work in international development. And rather than taking time to go over their bios, which are in your booklet, I think what I'll do is just turn the mics over to Asif and to the administrator for what will be probably a very lively and informative discussion. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Byron. My first line was going to be, please join me in welcoming the administrator of USAID, but you were ahead of me. Administrator Shah, thank you very much for taking the time. We know your time is very constrained this morning, and it's an honor to have you here. So people came to listen to you, so let me jump right in with the questions. This conference is very much about the future. Post-2015, MDGs, about how development in the future has to be different from the past. And yet, as we look at the MDGs, there is no governance MDG. I know Australia and other countries are very adamantly for it. Many in this town are for it. Can you tell us how you feel about a governance MDG? Because in Chinua Achebe's words, without one, things fall apart.
Well, thank you, Asif, and good morning, everyone. I'm really honored to be with you. Can you hear me okay? No. Okay. Let's see if this is on. This is red. Oh, that's better. Okay, there we go. Good. Sorry, well, let me start again. Thank you, Asif, and thank you for having me here this morning. I'm honored to be with all of you and amazed by the size and scale of this conference. It is a testament to the great work that the Society for International Development does and the effort of bringing everyone together to really think through the future is really important at this particular time. I think specifically, I think the future is all about ending extreme poverty and trying to achieve those end state goals. The end of extreme poverty, defined roughly as 2 to 3% global prevalence, end of preventable child and maternal death, the end of HIV/AIDS as a major pandemic disease, the end of widespread child hunger. These are now achievable goals for the first time, and we have to be cognizant of what it will take to achieve them. The question about governance is particularly important to achieving those goals because we know that, in part because of success of your all and your efforts, the concentration of extreme poverty, preventable child death, those critical indicators of a weak social fabric are going to be more and more concentrated in fragile states. So the ability to provide governance support, and not just in places where there's already a strong government to receive that support, but rather in places where by definition that doesn't exist, is going to be more and more important over time. And I hope you'll discuss over the course of the next, at least today, what are the best practices in getting that done? I'd say in all of the areas that I have the opportunity to oversee programmatic activity, I think we are most challenged in providing governance support in fragile states. And that's not, by the way, our fault here. It's like you all are doing the best we can. It's just a really tough challenge. And it makes the point that development is fundamentally a political process that requires political leadership in order to have the opportunity to provide this support to be successful.
But do you support a governance MDG?
I do. I think that we ought to have a strong governance, anti-corruption, transparency component to the next phase of setting global goals in the process of the MDGs or Sustainable Development Goals or whatever they're going to be called. And I think that's extraordinarily important. John Podesta, who represented the president on the high-level commission that did much of the legwork for this effort, would point out that that's one of the more difficult areas to build global consensus around a goal specifically. So it's something we're going to have to do, and we're going to have to do in a way that's open and brings our G77 colleagues to the table.
You mentioned ending extreme poverty, so I'm going to skip around in my questions to go to a related question. I think, all believe that we stand a good chance to, if not end, substantially reduce extreme poverty in our lifetimes. But there's another emerging trend, and that is the growth of extreme inequality. And that is unfortunately not just happening in developing countries, but also in our own country. The trend lines are dramatic. And there are many who believe that unless we curb that, the world will become ungovernable. I wonder if you would comment.
Well, I'm glad you phrased it that way, because I do believe that big pockets of relative inequality are potential sources of significant strife and unrest over time. We all know that poorer countries tend to have higher Gini coefficients than wealthier countries when it's all said and done. But that masks an even tougher reality, which is, the Yemen-Saudi border is, I think, the world's most unequal border in terms of opportunity and income on either side. Northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria are probably not far off when you look at just the huge disparity in basic indicators of children going to school, health and safety. So our job, in my view, is to focus on those sub-geographies that are more deprived relative to others, but do that in a way that helps to build coherence and stitch things together. When I visited Yemen, we brought Saudi business leaders and investors to Yemen to explore possibilities because, they're still doing business there, as many of you know. And they can be an engine of growth and engagement. And the way they handle migration policies will have a lot to do with what Yemen's income profile looks like. I was in Abuja just a few weeks ago, and I met with the northern Nigerian governors. And we talked through what we might do together on education and health and social protection. But at the same time, we worked with dozens of sub-Saharan African and international agricultural companies to encourage them to make investments in both the south and the north, because getting that agricultural economy to be more robust is a big part of creating broad-based growth in Nigeria. So I think we have to be flexible in our thinking, but as development professionals, having a strong geospatial understanding of what disparity looks like in different places and erring on the side of working in those tougher environments is, I think, ought to be a defining principle for us over the course of the next 15 years.
Thank you. Let's talk about some of the good things that are happening in development. Over the last 20 years, a large number of countries in the developing world have been growing quickly and have left the ranks of the poor nations and are approaching middle income status. The U.S. Agency for International Development is the umbrella that deals with all of these countries. How do you see, especially since these trends are expected to continue with differentiation, but how do you see that affecting the role of AID? Is there a need for a new institution in this town? There are plenty already, but is there a need for a different institution to deal with countries around issues like trade and
I think you make a very important point in that as countries graduate, the role that we play in countries that have achieved a certain level of income and social cohesion is going to be very, very different. You know, I personally, in those environments, we've basically moved resources out of about 13 or 14 countries during my tenure to be able to invest in places where it's more necessary. Some of that has meant closing missions, some of that has meant downgrading missions to offices and development counselors, and some of that has meant just moving resources. But we've shut down those efforts because we have higher and better use for those resources, and because, frankly, we can replace aid flows in those places with private capital, with public-private partnership, with science and technology and collaboration in those areas. We've, at USAID, developed 2 new institutional capabilities that I think are defining for whether USAID is a successful institution over the next 15 years. One is the recent launch of the US Global Development Lab, which is designed to really, in a highly structured manner, bring excellence in science, technology, and innovation to a broad range of activities that we will pursue. The second is something we actually just launched last week at our Global Mission Directors Conference, and that is the Private Capital Group. And it's basically a recognition that we're doing more and more partnership with sources of private capital. That could be local banks, it could be local private equity funds, it could be international banks and international private equity funds. But if you believe, as I do, that there are trillions of dollars waiting to be invested in emerging economies over the next 2 decades, we'd like to be a platform that helps connect investors with investment opportunities, and we think there are any number of ways we can do that. So those 2 capabilities, I think, are going to be defining for our relevance in economies that grow out of traditional aid models. And even in economies that require traditional aid models, those aid has to be provided in a much more public-private partnership, even in those settings. And I think we see that. I think we see tremendous local capacity, especially on the capacity to co-invest. You know, the Development Credit Authority has unlocked $1.7 billion of investment in small-scale businesses over just the last 3 years, which is about how much they did in the first 11 years of being around. So you see where the trend is going, and I think it could be even more robust in the future.
Thank you. You have spoken often.
Can I say one more thing on that point, Asif?
What do you think? Yes, please.
No, the other thing that we should always remember, because we have such a country-focused view sometimes, and the question was framed around countries that graduate and countries that don't, is that the United States and USAID has a unique ability to play a regional role. Right. And there are other development entities that are more locked into bilateral programming and partnership, and we should cherish and expand our capacity to do regional deals. Big regional energy projects, regional trade and investment programs, regional agricultural initiatives. And of course, the governance usually doesn't exist on the other end for big regional deals, so it takes time. But that's effort worth pursuing. And for those of you that run institutions engaged in development, I'd ask you to ask yourselves, how are you structured to think through those opportunities and pursue them effectively?
Very important, thank you. You've spoken often and eloquently about science and technology, including in your 4th annual letter, if I may hold that up.
You may.
There are copies around, and the administrator in his 4 years has set forth his priorities. And I want to ask you about 2 strands of science and technology. There is science and technology that is designed to find technical solutions to technical problems, better seed varieties, things of that nature. And then there is science and technology, more technology, that has come mostly out of the private sector and that has become a set of tools for empowerment of local populations, to give them a voice. Internet, Twitter, I'm running out of my knowledge of the rest of them. There's some Snap something. But
for now.
For now, right. It'll be gone soon. 30 seconds, I think. But these two strands are both having a huge impact on development. And I wondered, looking 10 to 15 years forward, how do you see these things as drivers of development?
Well, we created the U.S. Global Development Lab because I think these components of science, technology, and innovation are going to be fundamental to reshaping many, many parts of what we've traditionally called the developing world. And I really do believe that you'll see some of the best and newest applications take place in lower income settings and then migrate back to places like the United States if we get our act together. And I also know that the companies and technologists that are at the forefront of this trend are highly motivated to be engaged in emerging markets. That's true in part because they believe their technological ideas are in many ways salvation. They're very optimistic about their capacity to be transformational. But it's also true because when you look at just evolving market share in a highly networked business model, having a few hundred million or a few billion people before your competitor is going to be a major source of value over time. So I'd love to see the newest models of social networking, expand in developing countries or middle-income countries first and play a big role, as you've already seen, in unlocking human connectivity and activity around demanding better and more responsive governance. I'd love to see the next wave of health sensor technology be deployed, on behalf of very poor communities to help people understand basic conditions of health, as opposed to just being built into the new iPhone to help you get your heart rate monitored. I'd love to see, really creative thinking about how, in America, we're sort of stuck in terms of how we use radio bandwidth and what that means for can we have widespread, free, high-speed Wi-Fi for everybody. Much of the rest of the world, especially countries we all work together, they're not constrained by those current regulatory realities, and they could unlock a lot of radio waves for creating super fast Wi-Fi connections that are free. I mean, imagine if 10 years from now, Afghanistan had an integrated mobile payment system for most of its population connected to a super fast Wi-Fi system that was cheap and free for users in most of the capital cities, all because they were able to basically use unregulated public space, in this case radio waves, to create a new and different future. I think then Americans would say, boy, why don't we have that here?
Right.
And we'd have to ask ourselves some tougher questions. But I think you're going to see that happen. And I think the lab is designed to help accelerate that trend. And again, I'd ask each of you that lead institutions critical to development, do you have a little core team somewhere that is really scouring the next wave of technological advancement and trying to be creative about applying it to the areas in which you work?
Thank you. I'm getting a signal that we have 5 minutes left. I was trying to avoid looking at my watch because I think somebody did badly in a debate once doing that. I have two questions.
Who was that?
I think his first name was George, presidential candidate. I'll start with my last question, and if we have time, go to the other one. You've been in office for 4 years. During that time, you've accomplished a lot. If you stay through the rest of President Obama's term, that will be another 2.5 years. As you look back over the last 4 years, what are the 3 or 4 things that you feel you've really accomplished, that have made a difference, and that will last? And as you look forward, do you have a bucket list of things that you would like to see accomplished in the next 2.5 years?
I do. What a great question. Thank you. Look, I think the 3 things that we want to, institutionalize as achievements to date are, in my view, are best examples of the new model of development taking hold. And the 2 most powerful that I'm able to point to are Feed the Future and Power Africa. So, I'm fully committed to making sure that we institutionalize, get legislation to authorize, have teams and resources to support Feed the Future, Empower Africa as manifestations of this new public-private model of development that starts with country leadership and country commitments to reform, anti-corruption, and welcoming private investment. They're both very different, but Feed the Future has, this week we're announcing, it's reached 7 million farm households, moved 12.5 million kids out of a condition of being hungry, has raised more than $7 billion of private investment in often very, very previously considered unattractive agrarian economies in sub-Saharan Africa, and I think is part of a movement that is just taking off in terms of commercializing what was previously subsistence agriculture in many countries around the world. Power Africa, similarly, we've seen some early successes. I think we have to set the bar a little higher and aspire to some bigger regional efforts, and if we do that, we could make a huge dent in alleviating the biggest constraint to growth in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's number one. Number two is the lab. And I just believe that America should lead in global development with what it leads with in the rest of its economy, which is science, technology, innovation, and the capacity to partner. And I'm proud of the fact that a lot of our European colleagues have looked to us to say, how do we create a lab like this? Can we partner with you? And the lab is going to be an institution within USAID that I think will enable, enrich, and improve a lot of our work. We welcome more partners. We welcome your ideas and your creativity. These capabilities that we're building through the lab are extraordinarily important for the future of American development. So that's the second major priority. And the third is what I'd say USAID is the premier development institution. When I started, there was just this sort of mindset about could USAID be relied on to lead a major presidential initiative in development? Are we under-resourced? Do we have the staff to do X, Y, or Z? Today we're not asking those questions. We've hired in and built our staff by 1,200 to 1,300 people. We've built a policy and budget framework and groups that act with authority, and they should because they're smart and they're well-led and they know what they're doing. We have a capability to engage with donors around the world, so we're acting in concert and in partnership more aggressively. And the budgets have spoken for themselves. If you look at the last 4 years of our aggregate USAID budget, which is a number that didn't even exist when I started. No one knew what the USAID budget was. It has gone up about 16% relative to the 4-year period before. And that's in a tough 4-year budget environment with sequestration and all of that. And I think we have now strong bipartisan support that we saw on Capitol Hill even last night celebrating the Feed the Future progress report. So I think for this country to lead in the effort to end extreme poverty, it has to have a leading development institution that has the authorities and the capabilities, the leadership and the standing to represent the world's remaining superpower and to do it with confidence. And that's my third objective, is just locking in the progress we've made so we don't revert back to being too unorganized and under-resourced against our goals. In terms of bucket list going forward, the only thing I'd say that might differ from what I just described, because I think the bucket list is basically more of what we're doing, is I think this private capital group effort is particularly important. I don't know that we have the answers yet. I just know that over time I would expect to see hundreds of billions of dollars of private investment flood into country after country that is still on the list of places we should be working to end extreme poverty. And I don't even know really what that means other than we need to insert ourselves into that flow of funds and tip the scales so that that flow of funds doesn't just enrich a few people at the top and doesn't just lock in a corrupt or kleptocratic society, but creates real open opportunity for the masses. And I think that's possible, but it requires a little bit of a change in mindset for us. It requires all of us in this room to make some new friends and to learn from others and to adapt to the reality of that flow of funds.
Mr. Administrator, it is an honor to have you take the time out of your schedule to open this very important conference for the community that you lead. And it has been a real pleasure to have you here, and please join me in thanking the Administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asif. Thank you, Administrator Shah. We need to take just a moment or two to change the set, so bear with us for 1 second. But I'd like to draw your attention to the USAID annual letter that was issued on Friday. We have a limited number of these, which USAID has brought, which will be at the registration desk. You can also download this off the USAID website. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Lizanne Prosser, who is a member of the SID board and who is also this year's 2014 conference chair. I think many of us know Lizanne from her development work for USAID, the World Bank, the EU, and several of our member organizations. So we are very grateful for Lizanne for chairing the conference this year, and she will now begin to discuss the rest of the day. So Lizanne?
Thank you, Byron. And thank you, Administrator Shah and Asif, for giving us so much to think about so early in the morning. For those of you who think we've peaked for the day and you can go back to the office, don't even think about it. We have a jam-packed day, in fact, perhaps overpacked, but we focused on trying to get some new speakers in here, some new ideas, and I hope you'll agree that we've achieved that when you leave at the end of the day. Following up on Administrator Shah's conversation, we've put together what we hope is an interesting panel looking at some of his priorities in science, technology, and innovation. To tell us more about that, and I think we've got the stage set up now for that, just about, I'd like to introduce the moderator for this session, which is Kristi Ragan. Kristi is the Chief of Party for USAID's Grand Challenges for Development project. And she will introduce her panelists, Kathy Clark, John Willey, and April Dubois. Kristi? Got it.
Great, come on up. Just like Asif, we're going to jump right into this. We have two objectives for this panel. One is to pick up on a lot of the points that Administrator Shah just raised, and also to provide you some framework, questions, key issues that you can take forward into the sessions that follow. I think this is a great panel. I'm just going to give you the roadmap of how we're going to proceed. We have John Willey, who is going to bring in the government voice here, which I think is a critical one. It's often been left out of partnerships, left out of our thinking about new technology and innovation. We don't start with the national governments. This panel is going to start with the national governments and pick up on Administrator Shah's point about technology and governance. And then we're going to move to April Dubois, who's from real live private sector, from MasterCard, which, in case you don't know it, is not a credit card company, but a global technology company. And we're going to hear about technology and innovation from the private sector. And then we're going to shift to Kathy Clark, who's come up from Duke University, a former impact advisor, who's going to take three terms that I know are enigmas: social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and impact assessment, and really pick up on this whole idea that Administrator Shah just talked about as one of his big initiatives, which is investment and the role it's going to play in all of this. We will try to allow 30 minutes at the end for your questions so we can start bringing these issues to SID, which is the trenches, the real world of development, and I think that's why this panel is going to start kicking off that real, authentic interaction. So we encourage your challenging questions, and I get to ask a few of my own on this panel. So you go. Okay. Can you hear me? I guess so. I can hear myself. And I'm going to ask our panelists to try to keep their interventions to a couple of minutes so that we can move through a lot of information. As Administrator Shah said, governance is critical. I want to start out with John Willey, who's coming from the World Bank Group, and tell us about how the World Bank Group views the role of technology in this major issue of reform and governance.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Well, I think the bank group has been evolving in its approach to assisting governments, particularly through the development of IFC advisory services, which provides a lot more granular advice to governments around particularly issues of improving the investment climate and improving governance. Right now, about half of our advisory projects, which are mostly in IDA countries, have some sort of technology component, and usually they are focused around one or more of the following sorts of objectives, either improving transparency and accountability, broadening the reach of service delivery, particularly through mobile devices, reducing compliance costs, of course, and also administrative costs for government, which is an increasing burden. And then improving the quality of regulatory oversight. Usually, many of these regulators really don't have access to information from other agencies within government that would enable them to do their job more effectively, and we're helping them to begin to integrate some of these government databases in order to make their work more effective.
John, what's the real word on how national governments are really viewing all this technology? Are they seeing this as pushed, another thing being pushed by the donor development agenda, or are they really committed and buying into this and seeing this as a major area for progress in the developing, in their own countries?
I think by and large, I mean, I think it may be risky to sort of generalize, but I'd say the countries that we work with are by and large embracing this, particularly as they're moving to devolve service delivery to the provincial and to the local level. They're beginning to realize that they can't be running everything out of the capital city and forcing everybody to come to say Nairobi in order to register their business in Kenya. They have to be able to deliver these services much more locally, and you see President Kenyatta's, for example, effort to build a set of what he calls one-stop shops. I think the local term is Huduma, which will over time, I think, begin to take on some of the technologies available elsewhere in order to actually achieve this objective of devolution of service delivery.
Well, that's very positive to hear, since we all know that national governments really are still at the center of the development agenda in the worlds that we're working in. I heard Administrator Shah say that capacity building in this area is critical. What are your thoughts on, what are you seeing as areas of real need for more capacity development to be done in order to have technology, innovation, science, partnerships be effective in the developing world?
Well, I think there's two angles to this. Number one is encouraging the development of the local IT sector through effective public procurement. UNCTAD and BMZ did a very interesting report a couple of years ago on this, and I think we've been trying to live this mantra a bit ourselves by basically helping governments implement government-to-business applications that are developed locally, and then using open source software and then shared with other countries. So for example, just a small example, we've developed a system for managing construction permits, which actually in places like Kenya is a fairly big deal these days. Nairobi itself is getting something like 4,000 new construction permit applications every year because of the booming office sector there, and keeping this process afloat and transparent and hopefully less corrupt than it used to be is one of the objectives of the technologies that we're equipping them with, and we're now actually in the process of deploying these same technologies in places like Rwanda, and we're even planning to do it in Iraq, in Basra and Baghdad. Now the other area where I think there's a great deal of opportunity, but we really haven't stepped up fully to the plate is public-private partnerships. You have a number of different very successful models for PPPs here in the US. If you do business online with the state of Maryland, the state of Virginia, state of Pennsylvania, you're actually doing business with a private company who's operating this technology platform on behalf of the government and taking a transaction fee. And the governments like this, at least here in the States, because there's zero budget cost to them. The private partner basically pays for the technology overhead, usually collects most of their fees through things like motor vehicle registrations and driver's licenses, but it is then able to deliver this broader set of online services and replicate them from state to state at a lower cost. And we're working on a program now to see whether we can encourage some similar developments in some of these countries where the local capacity exists to deliver same sort of capabilities.
You mentioned local cost as an advantage. What about reduction of corruption? Do you think this public-private partnership model can offer impact in that area?
That's going to be the tricky bit, I believe. But I think it really depends on who emerges from this in terms of offering services. You have most of the big multinational tech companies have already made major investments in Africa. HP's there, IBM is there, plus you have some very strong local players like Safaricom. So I think if we can help them come up with a proper framework for this, then I think such things are possible.
Good. And I just want to, we're going to use public-private partnerships in two ways on this panel. John's just introduced one way, which is really the outsourcing of services. And I know April is going to be talking about public-private partnerships as a collaborative model. So bear in mind that we're going to use the term in two ways. I didn't want to confuse, and I think this one is an important one. And John, before I move on, I wanted to ask, do you think that this whole area, you said donors haven't really moved aggressively into the public-private partnership and supporting that. Should this be more top of agenda for donors going forward?
Well, the short answer is yes. I wouldn't necessarily blame the donors. I think, frankly, the players that are good at this have been busy conquering their home markets, and you're just beginning to see firms from places like Singapore now beginning to move out into this broader stage. But in many cases, they're initially setting up offices in the Gulf in order to sell to GCC countries. But I think I'm also seeing firms begin to use this as a stepping stone towards moving into other less developed countries.
Good. And actually, I'm going to trick you a little bit. I have a segue question before we move to April. In an effort to be fully transparent, I thought, I heard you say open source. And you know, one of the issues that we're facing in this whole technology is how much do we push towards support open source technologies, and how much should we be looking at more proprietary private sector built systems? What's your view on that before we move to the private sector?
Well, our position thus far, at least in IFC Advisory Services, has been to use open source technology to basically build some basic entry-level applications for the delivery of different government to business services, and then rely on the local private sector to do this. I think it's a perfectly viable model. The expertise is there in many of these markets. But you know, as we move more to a PPP environment, then you may see the vendors bringing more of their own technologies to play, which I think it's just a different delivery model, basically.
Great. Well, let's move to one of the world's largest vendors, MasterCard. I introduced April by saying she's a senior executive at one of the world's largest technology companies. And I would like April to talk a little bit more about why she sees MasterCard as primarily a technology company.
Sure. Happy to be here today. Let me see if I can move this a little bit closer. So, as you correctly mentioned, MasterCard is a technology company. We've been in the business of electronic payments for more than 40 years. Typically, I have to clarify who MasterCard is many times because I do get a lot of questions about, are we a credit card company? You know, what exactly do you do? So you did my job for me here. But basically what we do essentially is we build the roads that electronic payments ride on, and we also create the rules of the road. It's a very kind of easy way to explain what MasterCard does. We have a wide variety of different products and solutions that many of you may have actually in your wallets today. Everything ranging from debit to prepaid to credit, and then a number of form factors that we offer as well. As you mentioned, you know, our business really is transactions, so electronic payments. And what we're doing is we're helping governments. Governments have been a big topic today, and specifically governance and transparency. And one of the ways that we help governments and that we work alongside governments is to help them to become more transparent through the use and implementation of electronic payments. So by their nature, in many ways, electronic payments can really bring fiscal transparency to governments. And we're seeing this in hundreds of countries across the globe where we're working alongside governments to really help them in this area. And it's really a win-win for governments because electronic payments in many ways provides governments with greater efficiencies, so they're able to reduce costs. And the bonus kind of behind it all is that in addition to that, they also accomplish greater transparency in many cases. So I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully that'll get us started.
Yeah. What are the corporate assets that you're bringing besides your product to a developing country when you go in and talk with a national government? What are you presenting and pitching and marketing?
Sure. So some of what I just talked about obviously is kind of what we're talking with governments about. But many times, kind of how we start out is, you know, what are your pain points? So a lot of companies, I think, have the same conversation with their clients across the globe. And we not only work with governments, but we also work with NGOs, with MFIs, with many players in the development community as well, to really identify what are the pain points that you face and how can we look at this from an efficiency perspective and also from a cost savings perspective to really enable you know, greater reach and greater extension of limited budgets these days. So when we speak with governments, I'll just give you an example. We're rolling out in South Africa one of the largest financial inclusion initiatives on the continent. Specifically, we started with kind of the pain points with the South African government and said, hey, what are some of your issues? And right away we found out that fraudulent Social Security applications and social benefit applications was a really big pain point for them. And so in implementing an electronic payments program specifically within that country, just in the first year, we were able to save the South African government and eliminate 150,000 fraudulent applications. We were also able to help them save about $15 million in the first year and about $375 million over the course of 5 years. And in addition to all that, as if that weren't enough, one of the great things about these kinds of projects and systems is that we ladder about 22 million South Africans into the formal sector. So previously, whereas many of these folks didn't necessarily have any sort of ID, they didn't have any sort of formal way of receiving payment or sending payments, now each one of those folks has a debit card that's coupled with biometric technology, and you have also some real impact on the banked population within that country as well. So again, within the first year, the banked population in South Africa grew by 8%. So that's just one example of some of the things we're talking with the governments about and what we're doing.
Wow, the future's here, biometrics in South Africa. I wanted to shift a little bit off the national government and talk about what you bring in as far as technology and helping enterprises, since Kathy's going to focus a lot on the enterprise level. How are you assisting, and what assets do you have, and what kind of change are you seeing in the local business community?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I think a lot of folks don't necessarily think about when they think about electronic payments is we have an entire ecosystem that essentially we have to pretty much put in place to make secure electronic payments happen. So you may have on one side kind of electronic payment capability being issued to a consumer or an underserved population. But then on the other side, you've got to have a place where those electronic payments are accepted. And so what MasterCard does is we really put together that entire ecosystem to make sure that when you use a card or some type of mobile technology that is facilitating electronic payments, that that's going to basically work wherever you use it. And so in putting together that ecosystem, on the side of acceptance, you've got to have local businesses, including micro and small businesses, accepting electronic payments. And so one of the ways that we work with those populations is, I'll actually just give you an example, a concrete example of some of the work that we're doing actually with the World Food Program. The World Food Program project that we're rolling out across the globe is really kind of exciting because not only are we having a major impact on the World Food Program by helping them to reduce costs and to gain efficiencies like we talked about earlier, but in addition to that, we're also having a real impact on micro and small businesses as those businesses who essentially sell, whether it be food or other goods to refugees, they're many times, as they accept electronic payments, we see a massive increase in their revenue because they were able to retain and grow their client base. And so just as an example, in some of the countries where we're working with the World Food Program, USAID actually let me know, hey, listen, by the way, we've been seeing kind of a 6 to 12% on average increase in revenue from some of the micro and small businesses that are part of this program. And to be honest, it wasn't surprising to MasterCard because we've heard actually about businesses that have had anywhere up to 30% increase in revenue depending on kind of the markets where they're located and what products and services they have. So these are just kind of a couple examples, but I think it's a really good concrete example of how, as you look at technology companies, as you look at, we talked about public-private partnerships, as you look at the role that governments, the development community, the private sector can all have together, there can really be impact not only for underserved communities, but also for micro and small businesses, and then of course, for governments in the area of transparency.
So I'm trying to moderate my cheerleading positive personality today, and I do promise we talk about failures and negative, and let's just start out by, what's MasterCard's biggest pain points?
That's a good question. So our biggest pain points, honestly, are some things that I think that you all here in the room might be able to help us with. So excuse my pitch here. But I think one of the biggest pain points that we have is as we roll out some of these large-scale programs, one of the things that we deal with, just like I know many of you deal with this issue, is really uptake, usage, and more importantly, financial education or payment education. So really helping folks to understand how to use not only technologies, but then also how to manage their finances and really to kind of understand how to best utilize some of the products and solutions that they might be offered. So that's really an area that we depend on partners, I think, here in the room to help us with, really to help us educate from the ground up those consumers, merchants, et cetera, because in MasterCard's model, our main customers are not those folks. So we have a lot of other sort of layers between us and what we do and the end consumer. So helping MasterCard and working alongside of MasterCard, I would say, to really have an impact on these populations more than just offering them a product or an account. The goal here is to really be able to see folks accumulate assets and to lift themselves out of poverty. So I think we can all work together on that. Another area that I think is kind of a pain point that we can all work together on is really understanding underserved and micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. So as I mentioned, MasterCard doesn't really have direct impact on the end consumer that is utilizing a lot of our products, and yet one of our main areas of focus is creating products that banks and other entities can use for those end consumers. And so we really rely on development organizations and the players within the development community to really understand, who are the underserved? How do we work best with them? We know a lot about payments, specifically electronic payments, technology, scale, innovation. We can tackle a lot of these areas, but in terms of really understanding some of these populations that are in need, that's where we could really benefit. We have whole product development teams that would just love the opportunity to pick probably most of the brains in this room to understand, what are the needs, ongoing needs of the underserved. And then I'd also say, lastly, identifying players that are working in these developing markets. We have a lot of current customers that include many of the big banks that you may know of, or maybe the entities that you know of in the developed world. But when it comes to the developing world, and when we start reaching out to more rural areas, we really depend on organizations like yours to understand who are the best players that maybe we can bring into our ecosystem to be able to extend electronic payments even further down to the base. So those are some of the key areas that I think are opportunities for collaboration, but they're also pain points in many cases for MasterCard.
Great. I want to just put one point that John has introduced, which is the whole policy, regulatory, and the reform of that. You didn't mention that as a pain point or a constraint. So does that mean that everything's wonderful these days and
Absolutely
coming up
not.
roses on the policy side?
No,
or are you
absolutely
hitting a
not.
brick wall there as well? Because I also think that's an area that a lot of folks in this room work on.
Yep. I think you bring up a great point, and one that I've tried to keep it to 3, but there's just so many.
Add one more.
So I think if I could add one more, I definitely would add policy to that. I think there's a lot that we can all do together better understand how to work with policy makers across the globe. We also have an interesting effort that we are rolling out with governments across the globe, and that is to kind of educate regulators on, some of the areas that they need to be aware of as it pertains to policies around fraud and other kind of things that they should watch out for. And so we're actually proactively working with a lot of different development organizations already in this area to align our messaging so that policymakers and those who are really impacting regulations understand the importance of electronic payments and also understand the importance of some of the policies that they're creating and the impact that they have on electronic payments, and more specifically, how that trickles down to the impact either positively or negatively on underserved populations.
Great. I'm going to come back to the whole issue of partnerships after we speak with Kathy, because I want to put that back on the table, since Administrator Shah emphasized that we have to collaborate, and partnerships is going to be the way to go forward. So I'll hold that, because I'd love to hear what's not working there. I want to shift to Kathy to talk about and bring in the whole enterprise level, because I think we've got two big pieces: national governments, we've got the private sector here, global private sector. What about enterprise level solutions and this whole area of social return on investment and impact investing? Is this more wishful thinking than reality? Or what are you seeing?
Big question.
Yeah, you can handle it.
Yeah, so first of all, trying to put my answer in context. So I'm a professor of social entrepreneurship and impact investing. So I've thought about these things for about 20 years. So there's a lot of experience in it. And I would say my answer is a little bit biased, but as we have looked at, we have studied basically how entrepreneurial-based solutions scale their impact and what works. And we've studied the other side of the marketplace in terms of what are some of the barriers that they've had, and have really started to understand what the capital markets are going through. And that's the other part of what I do, is I run an impact investing initiative, which is looking at building out and strengthening those capital markets. The big picture, I would say, generically, across that, is that the nonprofit ventures that we've seen scale more slowly. And if you look at the kinds of obstacles they faced or the kinds of strategies that they've taken on, they are most effective at scaling their impact when they are leveraging policy or sharing their ideas with others, as opposed to just growing themselves. There's a great book that was out about 10 years ago called Forces for Good, which looked at high-performing nonprofits, things like Teach for America, Self-Help, and some other global ones, and this was the lesson. To do that well, however, those nonprofits need excellent proof points about their impact, and they need to understand what the drivers are for impact that they are sharing with others. The for-profit sector, is exciting because, in theory, it can scale faster. You can use market forces, you can use investors, you can find ways to get more capital faster and replicate a unit of a sale. The question there has been, and we've seen a lot of examples of this, can you actually maintain your mission as you scale? And the challenges of that, I could actually lecture for an hour and a half about all the people who have lost control of their mission, and there's a whole bunch of things that we and others in the field have been trying to do to change that, which end up being policy levers as well, right? New corporate forms or new kinds of certifications and so on. But the other really important thing for those ventures is to, especially if they're trying to meet the needs of underserved populations, is to make sure that those commitments are articulated and are actually put into their governance as soon as possible. so that they and their other stakeholders, which could be corporations, which could be other investors, which could be governments, align over that outcome and can continue that forward.
You know, I'm conscious that as I watch USAID and its Grand Challenge partners, which are many donors and foundations and even private sector companies, pick winners and get these innovators and build this network, and then we send some of them down to Duke. And I know that they don't come out of your accelerator in the same way that they went in.
We hope not.
And that is still a hard thing, I think, for the donors and the development community who are picking winners to. Can you talk about this transformative process, the failure that occurs in the process of success, and how we may need to change to start looking at this so that we can better support it?
It's so interesting, right? So what Kristi is referring to is that in addition to my professor and impact investor hat, I'm also co-lead of one of the Higher Education Solution Network Global Development Labs at Duke, which is a social entrepreneurship accelerator, and we're working with mid-stage global health ventures around the world and helping them accelerate their impact, which includes understanding their business models, understanding their competition and peers, helping them access capital, helping get them really high-quality research so that they can document what they do. And it's messy, right? There's no magic formula. The first set of, we're doing it as a peer structure as well so that the innovators can learn from each other, and that's been amazing because we have people doing similar models in different parts of the globe finding exactly the same problems independently, which is fascinating. But one of the first things we found in the first cohort was that we kind of said we're looking for people who are ready to scale, and they wrote us nice proposals and plans, and we said great, we have a group. And then we actually, this is one of the advantages of being a university, we sent students there for the summer. And they went on the ground, our little rogue due diligence team, and came back and said, turns out they're not doing this, or this. And so we realized, right, that there's this reality versus perception, and we were actually able to work very concretely with entrepreneurs and say, you know how you thought you were ready? Well, there's actually seven sets of questions that you need to get through to be ready for a real investor. And you either need to use your grant money now to answer those questions, or you need to convince people to invest in you to answer them. But you can't kind of stay where you are, run around the world, and think that you're investable. Some of the really kind of common things that we find people struggling with, one is their unit model. Do they have a unit that includes a margin that an investor can kick the tires on and be confident about? And the other one, and that's typically the nonprofits who kind of skip over that. We work with some extremely successful nonprofit social entrepreneurs that have won every award on the globe. And when we dug in, they had different unit models in different countries, and when you aggregated them, there was no margin, right? So we were able to say, look, you have to rebuild this from the bottoms up, which is not pleasant, but really, really important. And their customer is actually governments. Governments are actually buying this and paying for their services. On the for-profit side, what you find is people kind of, and this is part of the challenge in the kind of vision that Administrator Shah was talking about. We find some entrepreneurs who are actually coming out of the private sector wanting to address health challenges and partnering very early on with large corporate partners. And then realizing maybe a year or two in that all of those partners are not aligned around the outcomes that they want to manage to, which is around low and middle income populations. And so we've been able to handhold them and say, here are the things that other entrepreneurs have done really successfully to build that into their governance, and so that in a year from now, when you actually double or triple what you're doing, you will maintain that focus. And then we're also working, again, leveraging the power of the university. We're working with some amazing Duke faculty and faculty from other places to design random control trials when that venture is ready for them. That's the other thing. Entrepreneurs have no idea when to do impact assessment or what type to do and what's appropriate and when to invest in it. They often get that wrong. And we're able to walk through that with them and say, let's do this amount now and let's do this amount later.
So one of the other things I've noticed with all the innovations pouring into USAID is that there can be the right price point, the right business plan. You can actually get a product service offering that's poised for success, and then you hit what everyone sitting out there works on as development professionals, the behavior change, which can doom a successful, totally put together, iterated business plan. Comment on behavior change, the role it plays in a successful enterprise, and how do we begin to address that? And is there a role for people sitting around at these tables?
Yeah, it's really interesting. To me, and I'm kind of coming from business speak, right? So bringing to me, the issue of behavior change is the difference between a for-profit company counting outputs, basically saying we sell widgets, and if we sell a lot of them, we're successful, versus a social enterprise saying that sale is just the first part of what I'm trying to achieve. Let's say it's embrace baby warmers, right? Infant warmers, right? You sell them, you have no idea whether people are using them. And there's a great article in the New Yorker that Atul Gawande wrote last year saying, here's what's going on with these embrace baby warmers. The nurses do not perceive that these infants actually need to be warmed. They look just fine, so they're all sitting on the shelf to the side. Right, complete failure in terms of outcome. Now they've fixed that. I don't want to paint Embrace as a failure, but they noticed that, and they have changed how they are working with those health workers, because the behavior change, it turns out, is in that case on the part of the intermediary that has to make a decision about whether to use this great new technology or not. And that's just a microcosm of how we see this. So what we do is we work with both the private sector partners and the entrepreneurs to say, what is the ultimate outcome, and what are the manageable, efficient ways that you have as a business to actually get information about that as you operate. Let's not leave it just to the random control trial people, because that's actually not what they're necessarily good at, and that's going to be expensive and one time, and you're going to probably sit on those results for the next 10 years because you're not going to do it again. But what can you actually do in the course of your business to understand what is driving someone to pick up that baby warmer, or to pick up their mobile phone and sign up for microinsurance in Kenya, or other sorts of challenges.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, just moving just one degree off this issue, about just the general role of universities, students. And I mean, we're following Administrator Shah. He's made this a big point of his administration and governing of USAID that wants to fundamentally change the relationship of USAID and universities, students, faculty.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people that have been looking at like the land grant, universities, and watching development assistance go to the universities, it was, you know, if I put it really starkly and overstated it, it was money went out to the universities, they took it, ran with it, did their own research thing, and how did that impact, and how did it ever come back? Do you think that this is changing, and that the donors, and in particular USAID, coming out so strongly on changing this fundamental relationship, is it going to work? Where are the constraints to this? And are you beginning to see glimmers of?
Those are good questions. I'm not sure I can speak to every global lab. I can
That's
speak about our
fine.
global lab, though, which has been really exciting, right? So what's different, I think, about maybe the land grant example that you used is that modern universities are a mix of research faculty and practitioner-focused people, right? And so we have, for example, our accelerator SEED is a partnership between our social enterprise program within our business school and our medical school, which has tremendous expertise, right? We have a hospital chain in India who is curious about clinical quality. We can put them together with somebody at Duke Medicine, which is one of the top hospitals in the world. So we have that kind of synergy that we can do. It's also a partnership with the Duke Global Health Institute, which has degree programs, and we have a partnership with some people on the outside. So we have, for example, a partnership with Investor Circle, which is the largest angel investor network in the US, that has placed money into 275 ventures over the past few years and leveraged about $4 billion into early stage ventures. So we are able to bring these partners together, and the modern university is a very comfortable convening place for those sorts of public-private partnerships and collaborations. And then, of course, the special sauce to all of that is that we have the students. And the students are hugely motivated and interested in global development issues. And that's true. I mean, there's surveys that have been done by Deloitte of the millennial generation. The millennial generation for the past 3 years, through Deloitte's survey, has said that the primary purpose of business is to serve society. Okay, so these people are thinking very differently than perhaps 20 years ago. And we have students now who are trying to figure out, how do I take my business skills and apply them in countries and to problems that really matter to me? And being able to have a cohesive program where over time we can create course credit, we can actually modularize the experience, so it's not just, oh, do you feel like going to Africa tomorrow, which doesn't work well at all. Yeah. But I, for example, run a fellowship program of MBA students who are interested in impact investing. I had someone come through the 2-year program, and then she went on the ground and she worked with one of our seed innovators to reinvent their business model, and then she worked for 6 months with the Pratt Pouch, which is a new technology that came out of our engineering school, which is a dose-sized package for aid retroviral drugs developed in Africa, and she was able to create some of that business model. So just taking that knowledge that they can get through tight programs, and then finding a whole bunch of different ways to leverage it, it's really powerful.
Great. The relationships are changing. The world is changing. I'm going to ask 2 more questions to all of the panelists, then I'm going to open it up to all of you out there. So be patient. I know that you're chomping at the bit. I'm trying to ask some of your tough questions, and I know that you're going to bring tougher ones. But so after 3 years of working on innovation and technology and partnerships, I've banned the word scale to be used by my immediate project team. That's not because I don't believe in it, but I've just hear it used in all sorts of different ways. I don't know what it means. I don't know how we're going to get there. Sometimes scale is just a little thing, and sometimes scale is boiling the ocean and catalyzing global action, on every major development problem. So I want to ask you all about scale. I was recently in a conference, and I heard everybody said the way to scale is find the best practice, replicate. And it was a conference of 1,500 private sector companies, and I realized that what we were asking the private sector to do was copycat, which is not something. I thought, okay, we have to have a discussion. This is not going to be the end of the discussion, but I don't want them to leave this table without making a comment on how you see scale and what in the developing world, and what you see as let's say, the single, maybe most favorable entry point to getting there. I'm only going to let you say one entry point. And April, let's start with you.
So I think MasterCard has a unique position on this. In a lot of what we do, we really are scaling pretty much as our sole course of business. So the way we define scale, just throw out a few examples, is reaching 90 million Egyptians with the first Arabic mobile money program, reaching 100 million Nigerians with their first ever national ID card coupled with electronic payments, reaching 22 million South Africans with, again, the first capability that they have to receive and send payments. So for us, scale is really about reach, and you asked, I think, for a one word on how we maybe best accomplish that, and my one word would be governments.
Okay. Kathy?
Wow, I don't know how to do this in
I know.
20 seconds. We spent 10 years studying scale, and I guess I'm going to actually take the opportunity to dovetail something else in, so just for fun. To me, personally, the past 25 years have taught me that you cannot scale without really good partnerships with the capital markets. And to think of capital markets not just as the private sector, but as who are the other investors who care about your outcomes. And when you do that, it turns out there are a lot of interesting stakeholders. They could be corporations, they could be distributors, they could be suppliers, they could be competitors, right? That who may actually come together to share joint purchasing or other things. So what we are seeing in the marketplace is this tremendous growth in the institutions across all the sectors who are thinking of themselves as outcome buyers. And that's what the field of impact investing is kind of growing up around. It's a catchword and it means all these things. What it really is people who are saying, we care about these outcomes, we want to do this in a way that's attentive to the stakeholders who are involved, and we're all learning to do that and iterating, and we want to do it in a transparent way, which is a little bit different than how things have been maybe done in the past in some of these larger sectors. Those three factors, outcomes orientation, stakeholder alignment, and attention to transparency, are what I and my colleagues are calling a new collaborative capitalism. And this is where I do my shameless plug, which is just, we just wrote a book about this, which I actually think is, we're trying to say, this is larger than these kind of catch terms. And this is a really exciting time for people to be working together across the sectors. It requires a multi-sector, multilingual set of leaders, which, look at this panel, right? That's what we are. We have, and trying to blend these objectives. And if you want to read our short ebook, it's at bit.ly/collaborative-cap, I think. And it's on Amazon, and it's a short read. But it's a beginning of a larger book that we're putting out in the fall on what is really going on in the field of impact investing and the kinds of skills that it requires to do well.
Great. We're going to end with the World Bank Group's comment on scale.
Well, I think when I joined the World Bank Group about 14 years ago, I really felt that a lot of the things that we did were very artisanal. I think particularly over the last 8 or so years, as we've developed this advisory services capability, which is now morphing into this World Bank Group Global Practice Network, I think a lot more attention has been paid to how to go about scaling up our activities, basically through product management in the true private sector sense. I think particularly the IFC has adopted a lot of private sector disciplines in terms of deciding where it's going to focus its resource, and then making sure that it has the knowledge base, the staff deployed in the right places to deliver those particular products to our client countries. And when you look across the range of, much more narrow range of things that we get involved with now, I think we're having an impact in a much greater number of countries. I mean, for example, I can't think of a country off the top of my head where we haven't done some sort of work around, for example, starting a business and helping them get that right. And likewise with some of the other doing business indicators.
Great. So my last question before I turn it over is I want to end on a very positive note by talking about failure. I know that sounds odd, but bear with me. I guess another sort of bugaboo that kind of sticks in my head is the overuse of the term partnerships, and everything's a partnership, but yet we know that collaboration is key, and we have to find a different way of working. So I'd like to ask the panel to each comment on what they think a fundamental constraint has been to good, strategic, scalable, impactful partnerships from their perspective. And then I will open it up to all of you. Let's start with John, actually, at that end, and then work this way. Or do you want a minute to think?
Give me a minute.
Okay, we'll start in the middle then. Kathy.
Sure. I think one of the big constraints to effective partnerships is differing motivations, that are, perhaps perverted or underlying and are not expressed. I mean, especially in the nonprofit sector. I think nonprofits are at the beck and call of almost all of their partners in a way that we don't acknowledge. There's a power dynamic. There's strength in being able to say you have a corporate partner, even if that partnership is a failure, right? And so just recognizing that these sectors are not equal, that there are different perceptions and reasons that people get into bed with others that may not have to do with what you're trying to accomplish.
Good point. The inequality. April?
I think really just kind of on that topic, in addition to what Kathy mentioned, I think also sometimes we each, whether it be the private sector or the development community, perhaps we don't necessarily take enough time to get to know each other, get to know each other's objectives, and then really to kind of think about how do we create those win-win situations between us. So I see a lot of missed opportunities. I see a lot of organizations kind of knocking on MasterCard's door, thinking that we just have this gigantic purse that's kind of open for everyone, and not really understanding what assets we bring to the table beyond financial, and really taking the time to understand what motivates us, in terms of some of our efforts in the developing world, and how we can maybe kind of bring together our, our best assets with the development community's best assets. So I think that's kind of a key constraint. I think in addition to that, just thinking about some of the other entities that we partner with, when I think about government, when I think about even some of the larger development organizations, for MasterCard and even for some of our private sector partners, whether it be technology companies, mobile companies, whoever it might be, kind of the overarching statement that I hear pretty regularly is, wow, it's just so complicated to work with some of these organizations. And it was funny because MasterCard is a little bit new to working with the development community. And I remember some of the first times I was trying to kind of explain, who are development organizations and what do they do and how do they work to our leadership. I got a number of questions about, well, why do they do it that way? Why are their applications so long? And do we really have to fill all this out? Why so much reporting? This is what we do. So I think, again, kind of going back to understanding each other, it takes a little bit of give perhaps on the private sector side to sort of understand, okay, there's a lot of processes in place and they're there for a reason, and there's a lot of public funds that need to be managed, et cetera. But at the same time, I think there needs to be perhaps a little more give on the maybe large development organization side to think through how do we maybe take some private sector practices and implement them to really break down some of the bureaucracies that might be impeding progress.
Great. John?
So, yeah, I think this issue of complexity is really at the heart of it. We've been dealing with, for example, a lot of bilateral donors over the years, and their priorities have changed quite a bit with successive governments, with reduction in ODA budgets and so forth, and it's made it rather difficult at times to achieve sort of a consistent, sustainable set of results over time because of their differing areas of focus. I think that's something that you basically have to continue to manage, but with an organization like ours, where we have probably about 15 different donor partners that we work with at any one time, plus some private sector and not-for-profit partners as well. It's just takes a lot of airtime to manage.
Yes, it does. Okay, airtime coming to you all. We have really bright lights. This is kind of like Hollywood. So I can't quite see everyone, so I'm going to rely on, I hope, someone from SID to track down questions. Okay, good. So over to you. You can please stand up, grab a mic, ask a question. Keep it short. Don't use the question to make a point. You can do that in the networking reception. And identify yourself and where you come from. So.
To the left, there's a woman at the mic.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, I'm Susan Ray Ross. I'm wondering if you could give us some advice, because I think particularly in the technology space, a lot of times things get developed by companies, and then kind of when they have already developed a product, then they come to NGOs and say, could you help us field test it? So I'm wondering, I think to April's point, there's a lot of opportunities that could actually be beneficial for companies if they could think about getting NGOs involved earlier in the process so that it could be field tested and prototypes could be developed.
Who wants to comment on that, April?
Which organization was she from?
Susan Ray Ross. She's actually a consultant, I think, working with USAID.
Okay, great.
And she's in health.
No, that's a great question. I'm kind of wondering if you have maybe a spy within our walls at MasterCard, because that's actually something that we've just begun doing. One of the first things that we kind of undertook as an exercise internally was when our leadership essentially declared our mission, which is a world beyond cash. When we started kind of looking at how do we get to a world beyond cash, it was really critical for us to identify key partners and players that we would work with together to reach some of the populations that we haven't necessarily reached before. And one of the things that we started doing is really kind of educating our staff across the globe about who are these players, who is the development community, because many of our folks actually were not really aware. There were a lot of questions about, well, what's the difference between USAID and a Mercy Corps, for example? So after all of that education, one of the things that we did was really gather kind of a core group of folks together to understand their pain points, to identify some things that we could do together, and we're continuously in the process of doing that. So in terms of our product development, I mentioned that that's an area that we need to know what are the pain points of many of the organizations in this room. We kind of have an idea of what some of them are, but you certainly know them way better than we do. And we very much look to engage early on because we certainly don't want people in the developed world to be developing solutions that don't make sense for those in the developing world. And that's one of the reasons really why we have a very active focus on reaching out to development partners to really engage with them as early on as possible. We have not only several different product development teams that engage with them, but then we also have, many of you don't even know that we have what's called MasterCard Labs, which is a lab that completely creates, ideates, incubates technologies in the area of electronic payments. And we're also working very closely alongside the development community to really innovate and bring new electronic payment technologies that are going to benefit the developing world and the underserved, and also governments and a lot of the other stakeholders we work with. So early engagement is very much something we desire as well.
Great. Do any of the other panelists want to come? Okay. I'm going to just ask you if you're standing at a mic since I can't see any of them. We need sunglasses. Okay.
Hi, Mirza Johani from the Aga Khan Foundation. I was very much looking forward to hearing a bit more about impact investment. I think Kathy was going to tell us something about that. And in particular, I would like to understand how we are measuring impact in your program. Thank you.
Thanks. So the field of impact investment has been grappling with impact assessment and measurement for over 20 years. And there are many different practices that I'm sure you're familiar with across the spectrum that range from trying to help people set up extremely strong output measures within their organization, set targets and meet them, There are new efforts to try to standardize some of those outputs. So IRIS, which is a program run by the Global Impact Investing Network, is a set of standard definitions for different, like what is a full-time job, right? So that the hours and what that contains is in an IRIS definition, and they actually collect metrics from a whole bunch of different impact investing funds around the world and benchmark what is going on. And then there's a third effort around, again, for the impact investing fund level, to look at whether there should be standard metrics for funds themselves in terms of the impact that they are able to create. And I was part of the group that put together the GEARS standards, the Global Impact Investing Rating System, which is slowly being migrated to a new brand called B Analytics. Those are kind of some of the broad strokes. When you actually look at the enterprise level, what we have found is that every enterprise needs to target their own impact assessment to their own theory of change. There is no shortcut in this. It is not as if you can take a bunch of things off a shelf, turn it in an online form and be done. And so we very strongly believe and work very closely with our entrepreneurs to hone their theory of change and to try to articulate what the outputs and outcome measures are for them and have them integrate that into their operations. We actually also have the person who created IRIS has come to Duke and is part of our team at SEED, so we have a lot of good expertise on this.
Great. Other questions? Okay.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Charlotte Moser. I'm from IUCN, and I co-chair the Environment Work Group for SID. My question is about clean climate technology in developing countries. What kind of financial return is the private sector looking for by putting in new clean technologies in these countries?
Not sure we have anyone that can answer that, but does anyone want to make just a general comment on what?
My general comment on returns is they are hugely variable. We just completed a 2-year study of some of the most successful impact investing funds around the globe, and their returns range from 0.25% to 26%. And those returns, the reason we profiled them is we had a sneaky definition. Our definition of successful was people who met or exceeded their investors' expectations. And the one who had the 0.25% actually has an investor group that meets quarterly to set the interest rate. So de facto, they are meeting their own expectations. They set it so low because they want to be working with social enterprises, and they don't care so much what the high return is. But just to say, people always ask me, is 6% enough? Is 8% enough? The terrain is hugely varied, and so there's no one size fits all answer.
Thank you. Yes, question.
Hi, Ben Mann from Tetra Tech. In all the discussions that have happened about innovations in technology, I think everyone in the room would probably agree that youth, and as you guys mentioned, millennials, students are kind of a huge resource as we advance in this field, and that they are the ones who are most engaged usually in technology. But I was wondering how, in a lot of our projects in developing countries, we're looking at youth empowerment, and we don't always do the best job of it here in the US of engaging or kind of bridging the gap from students and internships into getting youth actually into the marketplace as young professionals into these fields. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts and advice on how we can better be engaging those and using that resource.
Great question. Do you want to start, April?
Sure. So at MasterCard, we actually have a pretty active recruitment process across college campuses to kind of get them excited about, not even at a college level, but even starting in high school, and in some of our volunteer programs, even at an elementary school level, really helping them to kind of get excited about technology. So we take our MasterCard Labs folks kind of on the road. We have them bring kind of their most exciting gadgets and innovations, and really help students understand more about how they can leverage and use technologies both in their everyday life, and then also how they might transition their interest in technologies into a career. So from that perspective, we do that across the globe. We hire We hire young people right out of, many of them we bring into an internship first and then transition them into full-time employment across the globe in all of our different locations. And in addition to that, we try to really create an environment for youth where they thrive within the company and are able to grow, network, et cetera. So we have a lot of different groups. We actually have a young professionals group that's specifically for younger individuals in the company to help them kind of get to know each other, get excited, and be creative as much as possible. We, as a technology company, we have a lot of kind of fun things that we provide to students and to interns and to young folks and even older folks across the company in terms of, just really kind of creating an atmosphere where people can brainstorm, where they can be creative. Creativity and technology really go hand in hand, so we try to, implement as much as possible and create an environment that really encourages that. We also have a lot of products geared toward students to help them sort of get a first experience with managing their finances and really kind of understanding some of the tools that are available to them before they're, before they have some more advanced tools later on in life. So that's another thing that we do is we really work with a lot of the student unions and also on college campuses and other locations to really make sure that students are being able to utilize IDs paired with payment technology so that they kind of understand how to use and manage that prior to launching into more advanced products.
John?
So I'm not directly working in these areas, but we have one initiative that started in the MENA region and is now, I think, will morph into sub-Saharan Africa. It's called Education for Employment, and it's basically looking at developing tailored programs in different countries that will help students make the transition from university environments that perhaps don't fully equip them with all of the skills they need to function effectively in the business workplace and help them make that transition. For example, in Egypt, I know there's a program that the government has been supporting for a number of years. It takes several hundred graduates and actually puts them through a 20-week program in partnership with technology firms in Egypt to really make that, equip them with that last 20% that will enable them to work effectively within these private sector employers. And also another initiative that InfoDev has been doing has been these app labs and M labs, and I think they've been very good at both enabling young entrepreneurs to kind of showcase their talents as well as giving them some better grounding in the other aspects of doing business that they need to really function well in the marketplace.
Great. I guess I'll just say we're in the business of doing that. So, the good news is that, we're one of the top 10 business schools, and over 40% of the people that apply to our business school, Fuqua, say that they apply because they're interested in social impact careers. And we have support for that from the dean's office on down, which I can tell you is immensely satisfying and refreshing, and it means that we actually introduce social entrepreneurship, impact investing, volunteering, and other experiences to every single student who comes through that school. And we have been doing that for 11 years and are continuing to do that. Outside of that, I would say, there is a vast and expanding network of support for young people who are interested in getting on the ground within organizations, that ranges from fellowship programs like Echoing Green and Ashoka, where someone would come with an entrepreneurial idea and get a little bit of money to develop that idea, to some more interesting variations on that, which relate to some of the things that John was talking about. There's a venture philanthropy group in Europe that actually runs something called the ICAT Fellowship, where they take young people and place them in social entrepreneurship organizations that they have funded. There's the Acumen Fellows Program, which is very, very competitive, but very exciting, and several of our grads have gone into that. And there's a number of other new initiatives, basically to do this kind of higher level, year or 2 year long, on the ground, inside the institution kind of an experience. Agora Partnerships also does that as well. So there's more and more of that coming up, and you know, people are creating very, very, very solid programs that allow students and others to do that.
Great. Okay, I can't even see that.
Hi.
Okay.
My name is Michelle Reisinger. I am the Innovations Officer at PACT. And it's been discussed that NGOs implement more slowly. And you've mentioned bureaucracy as being one of those factors. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the weaknesses that you have identified in the NGO model, and what you would change about the NGO model that could better facilitate these types of partnerships and improve program implementation.
So I guess I should caveat this by saying I think there are a lot of benefits that the NGO community brings to the private sector. And I've mentioned a number of those. In terms of challenges and perhaps areas of that could be improved, I think I mentioned sometimes it being a little bit complicated to work together. That's kind of a big one. In addition to that, I think in many cases we don't necessarily speak the same language and sort of see eye to eye. So really identifying what those win-win situations are, where you know, where a corporate can achieve the results that they're trying to achieve while also helping an NGO to achieve what they're trying to achieve, and then perhaps the donor and government behind those NGO funds to be able to achieve their objectives as well. That's really kind of you know, what I think is sometimes a big missing link. I think the other thing that we notice at MasterCard a lot is that there are a lot of NGOs out there sort of recreating the wheel again and again on technologies that already exist and could potentially be leveraged in a developing world setting. And so in many cases we see proprietary sort of private label technologies and payment systems being launched again and again and again by different microfinance organizations or by sometimes governments. And a lot of these private label proprietary systems are not really open and interoperable and don't ladder folks into the formal sector completely. So a lot of people who use those systems are really sort of tied to those versus being able to make a payment anywhere. And one of our beliefs is, hey, people shouldn't be tied to a system. They should be able to make a payment wherever they need to, and it should be as convenient as possible for them, and also secure. So from my perspective, that's kind of a big one as well, is really looking at, is the NGO community leveraging perhaps technologies that already exist but could be adapted in an easy way to a developing world setting, or is there, you know, kind of more of the recreating the wheel for the benefit of a donor or a project? And I think a lot can be done to really scan what's out there and to leverage the private sector a little bit better in that way. And I think likewise, in all fairness, the private sector can do the same. So in many cases, we're reinventing the wheel when it comes to really understanding the underserved, or you know, kind of trying to find partners that can help us get down market, when so many of you in this room are already doing that really well. So I think on both sides there are gaps and ways that we can both come together in a better way.
Great. I don't know, Kathy, if you wanted to add anything. You've mentioned nonprofits. We have another question.
Sure. My name is Josh Leland from Commodities International. I work on private sector partnerships. There have been dramatic changes in the development landscape over the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in terms of the role of the private sector, investment from the private sector. The administrator spoke a little bit about some of the priorities for USAID moving forward over the next 10 to 15 years. And I wonder if our panelists would venture to predict what might be the most surprising development 10 to 15 years hence in terms of the role of the donor community, in terms of the role of NGOs, and particularly the private sector as well. Thanks.
Great. Great question. Okay, crystal balls out. Is the World Bank's crystal ball, which is bigger than others.
Well, we're in the midst of a reorganization, so we're a little inwardly focused.
Oh, we don't have any crystal ball. Do you have any comments on what you think 15 years down the road?
Well, I think my own view is a lot of these cloud technologies that we're seeing today are just going to be become so wrapped into the whole service delivery mechanism that it may be really the dividing line between the donor and these other providers may become increasingly blurred over time.
Wow, okay.
I have two.
Okay.
One is, I think that in 10 or 15 years, I hope, we will get better at understanding how to blend different kinds of organizations, nonprofit and for-profit. I'm not talking about partnerships, I'm talking about kind of hybrid structures, where there's a lot of experimentation going on with whether a nonprofit should own the for-profit subsidiary or back and forth. We've looked at across that, there's not enough yet. I think with these new private sector partnerships and the need for people to kind of sequester their stakeholders' money in different ways, we're going to see a lot of growth on that, and hopefully we'll get smarter about that, so we do it in ways that maintain mission and also please stakeholders. The other thing that has come up now that I hope that we'll have solved in 10 or 15 years is this issue of data and transparency. There's a lot of rightful pressure within the development community to know where their money is going and to have better access to the kinds of things that are happening in the field. When you put that up against private sector partnerships, that it's not always compatible. And so this is what you were saying before about copycatting versus proprietary. This issue of what a corporate boundary is, if you're doing something that is mission related, I think is a little bit unclear to us at the moment, and it's come up and kind of again and again. On the other hand, I think, and this relates to something that April was saying, you know, there is a lot of duplication of effort of people trying to do the same thing in the same markets or in other markets, and I think it would be, you know, really important for the success of our field to be better at linking those and understanding when something is similar to something else and when it can be joined and made more efficient and when maybe one model is simply better than the other. And that does take data, right? So we need both of those to come together and work more effectively. Yeah.
So I don't know if I have a crystal ball on this one, but I'm going to use a quote that our CEO says a lot, and that is, keep it simple. And this kind of even goes back to some of the comments earlier on some of the constraints and perhaps sort of issues with, you know, private sector working more effectively with government and with the development community. And I would say, you know, in terms of a crystal ball, I'm just going to put my hopes out there. I hope that it would be more simple. I think that there are a lot of ways that we can not only simplify the way we work together, but also be more effective, and as Kathy just brought up again, really leverage and refuse to duplicate things that are already working. When we think about some of the technologies that have just recently transformed our lives, you know, for me anyway, Uber comes completely to mind. I just used it recently in Mexico, was trying to get a ride and was able to literally just, you know, call my ride right away, you know, via my Uber app. And I think about, you know, what the administrator said regarding Afghanistan and really putting the power of technologies in people's hands, sometimes who may not have had access to it before. And so a lot of times we talk about access as being an issue right now, but looking 15 years from now, I certainly hope access isn't the issue. I hope that we have other issues to take a look at. When we think about, you know, some of the millions of people that, you know, MasterCard's reaching, that World Bank is reaching, that you all are reaching through your programs, I certainly hope that we're not still talking about inclusion anymore. I feel like we have the ability to really make a difference at scale, and we can increase our reach by working more smartly together. And my crystal ball is going to be a hopeful one that says, hopefully we will not be still talking about these things, and we will have other issues to tackle versus access, inclusion, and getting technologies in the hands of people who really need it.
Great answer. Okay. Yes.
Hello, thank you. It was an amazing panel. Thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Dr. Elvira Barracochia. I'm the president of Medigo Inc., a small global health consulting company. And I'm also the co-chair of International Health and Nutrition Working Group at SID. So my question is, do you have any examples of effective global health partnership, private and public partnerships in the health sector that expand coverage, that, for instance, increase transparency through electronic payments of user fees, that expand health insurance, access to quality healthcare services? Because we know that in terms of the MDGs, really there is still millions of lives that are being lost that could be prevented. So I'm sure there's many effective practices that you would like to share. Thank you.
I can speak to that. So we have a lot of different partnerships across the globe, and they really cover a number of different sectors. So when you think about electronic payments, we use payments for everything, right? So when you think about it, when you make a payment to your healthcare provider, many times we're making electronic payments, sometimes hopefully. In the developing world, it's no different. So when you think about all the different payments that a government has to manage or to kind of think about, you think about payments to healthcare workers. You think about, in some cases, there's a national healthcare system, and there's payments kind of going back and forth between citizens of that country and the national healthcare system. So in terms of health, and health isn't just the only one, there's education payments, there's salaries, there's social benefits, you name it, there's all different sectors or types of payments, if you will. And so in terms of what we're seeing there, some of the same programs that we're rolling out that leverage national IDs coupled with various technologies, we're using those for healthcare payments as well. Or the governments, I should say, are using them for health payments as well. So like I said, whether it be healthcare workers, whether it be laddering folks into the formal sector via an ID card that also allows folks to pay for their healthcare services, or to ladder in via the national healthcare system. Those are some of the ways that we're leveraging payments in health.
Okay. We'll take another question.
Yeah, take another question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Paul Emer, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer, worked for USAID for a while, a number of decades, and was a health person. After my work with AID, I also have done some work with the NGO, the nonprofit, and the profit sector, and I really appreciate the opportunity here to talk about trying to bring these two sectors, the government and the private sector, together. I just wanted to ask you, I'm going to oversimplify here, so please forgive me, but in my experience, these numbers of decades, particularly living overseas, what I found is that government individuals connected with the government and individuals working with the private sector, they come from different planets and they speak different languages. And so I'm wondering if you all could maybe give us either some tips or some ideas or some examples of how you have actually bridged that gap, because again, to oversimplify, often what I hear private sector people saying is that government is bureaucratic and inefficient, and what I hear government people saying is that the private sector is only focused on making money and they don't give a damn about what happens to people. Yeah. And so how do you actually bridge that gap, and do you have any examples of how that worked and how to do that? Thank you.
Well, April, I think that comes to you.
I think I opened up a can of worms here. So yeah, we have quite a few examples. I'll just give a kind of a really top of mind example. When we started thinking about some of the different partnerships that we might want to pursue in the development world, we immediately started thinking about organizations like the World Bank, like the IFC, Inter-American Development Bank, et cetera. And in many of our conversations, we, kind of hit a number of the same challenges that you referenced and that we've talked about earlier. We speak different languages, right? So in some cases, some of my private sector colleagues would use certain language that would really ruffle the feathers of some of the development people in the room, and they would be like, what are you talking about? And so in some cases, we kind of needed a little bit of a translator. Sometimes we still do. So I think what we've seen kind of work the best is to really be able to sort of, for lack of a better term, open up the kimono and kind of share that we're coming from different worlds from the very beginning, and to help our development partners understand what our challenges are and why we're at the table. And then likewise, typically our development partners, become a little bit more familiar with who we are and what we're trying to do, and many times we'll share some of their constraints. And we really have to come from I think both sides have to come from an open understanding that we all have challenges. We can't do this alone. If we're really going to make an impact and really move the needle in some of these areas that we all talk about, we absolutely have to do more than just talk about working together. We actually have to put that into practice. So what we've seen specifically is by helping folks understand what our challenges are, and by trying to understand the organizations that we work with. And I think the IDB is a great example. We just actually signed a strategic partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank recently. It took a while. It's not easy. And we had a lot of folks internally that had to sort of understand, well, why are we partnering with them? What exactly are we going to do? So, and there's still a lot of that, right? But on both sides. So even within the Inter-American Development Bank, they were like, what? Why would you want to partner with MasterCard? Aren't they a credit card company? So, there's a lot of education on both sides to really help everyone understand what our objectives are. And when we came to mutual objectives, we kind of put together a little translation chart. So where MasterCard may be interested in, furthering government business, our business actually creates, in many cases, more transparent systems. So when IDB heard about the fact that, government business equals government transparency, wow, that's great. The next thing was kind of translating, okay, MasterCard has a need to build out the payment ecosystem across the globe. And, what's the translation of that? That's actually empowering MSMEs. Wonderful. So, as we kind of find those key points where we have commonality, that's where I think a partnership is possible. In a lot of cases, both sides don't take the time to really figure that out. And so you may have, an organization that's just waiting for corporate dollars, and then they get it, and then they kind of move on. Or you may have a company that's kind of like, oh, I need to do something in that country. Let me choose this one. Let me choose this partner, and may not necessarily take the time to really understand them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think a lot can be done on both sides.
Great. Go to our last question.
Tony Kingsley from PwC. I'm sorry, April, this one's for you. You've been a bit overworked, but I'm just wondering what technical advances in your lab are actually being cooked up specifically to reduce the cost of repatriating our workers' remittances, the $400 billion that is earned by people from poor countries working in rich countries.
That's a great question.
You might have a target for the percentage that it might cost to say. I think it's about 9 now.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we've been cooking up quite a few things, and I'm not sure if you've read about some of our latest ventures, but we've actually launched something called Money Send. We have another partnership with Western Union, and then we also have a new platform called Home Send that we've just announced. And basically with the merger of these 3 technologies, as well as some of the other technologies that we're innovating in our lab, we really are absolutely focused on capturing and helping those in the developing world be able to send and receive remittances more easily. An example of something that we've commercialized and that we've launched in terms of a project recently on that specific issue or that specific area is a new program, which you can actually see a video of this. I was going to show it today, but you can find it on YouTube. And we have a new partnership with a number of players in Egypt where we launched the first mobile money platform there, purely Arabic mobile money, first ever. And I mentioned that's reaching 90 million. So what our goal is really is to make it simple for folks to be able to send payments. We want to make sure that that can take place anywhere. And it's not an easy operation. As you know, there's many different regulations. We talked about policies previously, and this is kind of a key issue for us around remittances. There's a lot of regulations that prevent advancements there. And so for us, we're still working on this, but it's definitely top of mind, and we have a number of different innovations that you may want to check out on our website.
Great. Well, I'm going to take a cue from Asif, and I think we've wrung all the wisdom out of this panel. I know the moderator is exhausted. And before I leave you to a 30-minute networking break, I'm going to ask the panelists to tell me what's on their bucket list, since that was a question put to the administrator. I think it's worthy of you all. But since we've been looking so far out already, let's shorten the time frame. And what's on your bucket list for the next 24 months in technology, science, innovation, partnerships, all of them? And we'll do this in less than 5 minutes. Who would like to start with their bucket list?
Maybe you can, I'll let you start.
Okay.
I'll be very short. I think this whole concept of e-government, private-public partnerships is something that's got a great deal of potential in the developing world, and I'd like to spend a good part of my time over the next 24 months seeing how we can come up with business models that actually make this work.
Great. Kathy?
I have two. One is
You always have two.
I always have
Okay.
two. Sorry. I want to, no, I'm going to forget what the second one was, so I'll just do one.
Okay.
That was it? That's gone.
Sorry. That was my technique.
Sorry. One of them is I'd like to see 2 to 3 of our healthcare innovations really move the needle on a problem, or get closer to doing that. And the second one actually is on the capital side. We have, we're cooking up some new ways to get much more money into healthcare innovation. And I'd like one of those to take off in the next 24 months.
Great. April?
All right, well, my team is actually a new team, and we actually have what's called a bucket list. It's our list of objectives that we work on. For you. And we created that really to kind of keep us in check and to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. So I think about the bucket list actually pretty much every day. And for me, I would say that there are a number of things on my sort of professional bucket list at MasterCard that I know I need to achieve. And many of those, I think, have to do with you in the room here, and that is expanding our partnerships to include more development organizations. I also mentioned that one of our objectives is to really leverage the development community in a better way in our product development. So that's also on there. We have a number of different initiatives that we're working on that, but we can always bring in new partners. And then in terms of impact, within the next 24 months, I don't have a crystal ball, but I'd really love to be able to see MasterCard and the development community working side by side on some really innovative projects. We have some amazing things that I kind of talked about a little bit today, whether it be in Egypt, whether it be in Nigeria, South Africa. I mentioned just a handful of them, but we have them all over the world. And they really are impacting millions. So from my perspective, I'd love to be able to see us connect where perhaps the development community can bring some of the assets that I talked about to the table on some of those projects that we're working on right now. And MasterCard could potentially bring some assets to the table for some of you all. So that's what I'd like to see in the next 24 months.
Great. I think this has been a great panel. Thank you for all the rich ideas, for helping us unpack some of the enigmas of development right now around these terms of innovation, technology, partnerships, impact investing and all of this. I'm not going to summarize, but I am going to say that I'm left this morning and every day with this accelerate, not just grow enterprises, but speed things up, and this need for speed that Administrator Shah talked about, the whole idea of the lab accelerating impact. As the problems get bigger, as the world grows, as everything gets more intense and a brighter color. So I know that we can use these ideas to help get at this other conundrum, which is how we're going to speed things up and do it faster and still get the quality that everyone in this room is committed to. So I'm going to send you forth to your networking break after I thank John, Kathy, and April. Please join me. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I will turn them over to you. I do want you to use the networking break to do what Administrator Shah said, go and make some new friends. And one of the things that I've seen about this whole proposition is that putting unlikely suspects together can be really beneficial. So use your networking breaks to track down somebody that is other than you and have a great conversation. I will turn it over to
Kristi and panel, thank you. That was fantastic. Thank you, guys. Wow, what a panel. You know, you think you work in this business for 20 or 25 years and you know what you're doing. And then you listen to something like that and realize how little you know. But anyway, I'm doing the logistics spiel. As Kristi said, we are about to break for a networking half hour. The exhibit hall across past the coffee and the donuts is open and will be open until 5 o'clock. So by some point during the day, try to get over there and see some of your colleagues and some of the players in this business who've been generous enough to help us today and sponsor. The format today, as I think you will probably recognize, we've got a networking break, then we've got 4 concurrent breakout panels. Then we have our lunch plenary panel and the presentation of the Rice Award, followed by 4 concurrent breakout panels this afternoon, and then a reception. And with the reception, we're going to do something a little different this year. Our SID board members are going to do a summary of the day's breakouts. This is intended to try to pull together a package of, well, what did we learn today? And 2, to help some of those of us who maybe wanted to go to more than one breakout session, pull out the highlights of those breakout sessions. So I hope you'll stay with us all day until the reception and listen to the summary for the day. Breakout panel rooms are down towards registration and to the left. So with that, I will again thank Kristi in this panel, which I thought was just fantastic, and let you guys go out and have some coffee and mingle and do business.